What is up with Harley Davidson? Has Donald Trump just saved the day, or is it the same old in the Harley Davidson world? I'm talking about Harley Davidson today in this video, in the show, because there's been quite a few stories of the last few weeks, a couple of videos which I've sort of latched onto, and I'm wondering, well, what's all this about? So the first thing I want to talk about is Harley Davidson and Trump coming out in the news, talking about tariffs with India and everything like that. Let's just talk about the facts here about Harley Davidson. That yes, they wanted to break into the Indian market because it's the biggest motorcycle market in the world. They sell millions and millions of motorcycles every year, over 1 billion people there, right? But they did it a few years ago with the street bikes. They were manufacturing those in India. Those street bikes, 750, 500, were too expensive for the domestic Indian market. People weren't buying them because they were just too expensive. They kind of, India had tariffs on American products going into India, and it wasn't being reciprocated. And this is what Donald Trump is on about. Yes, because they're saying, well, we're just going to put tariffs on Indian imports, but that's not going to help Harley Davidson, because Harley Davidson is still selling really expensive motorcycles. They're never going to be sold in any numbers in India because the incomes are just not there to support that. All right, so that's not going to change anything in terms of tariffs for Harley Davidson. That's not going to save the day. It's not going to do anything. That's a great soundbite for Donald Trump about, tariffs and everything. In the overall grand scheme of things, it might be great for what he wants to do and great for anybody who supports him. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, does it help Harley Davidson? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't help them at all. All it does is makes their products just as expensive in India as they ever have been, and people still won't buy them because 99.9% of the people in India don't earn anywhere near that kind of money. Now, that was with the street bikes. Nobody could afford them, so they had to pull out of India. Remember, Harley Davidson pulled out of India. They pulled out because nobody was buying there, so they had to downsize. They left any kind of process or any kind of ability to service those bikes that are already sold in India. And I think they teamed up, from memory, it was something like TVS or something like that. They said, okay, we'll it could have been Hero actually at the time, I can't remember. This is before the Hero deal came out. They actually said, okay, we're going to leave our bikes with TVS, or that they'll be able to handle any kind of issues with the bikes and that kind of thing. So there's almost like a little bit of a presence in India, but not much, not really, because they pulled everything out. Right? It was big news at the time. Then obviously they went and tried to go back in India, but they obviously had no bikes that anybody wanted to buy. So they teamed up with Hero Motorcorp, the biggest motorcycle manufacturer out there. And with this X440, remember, they'd already gone into China with the X350 and the X500 as well. This is the X440, and they sold a few bikes. I mean, but again, drop in the ocean when you're talking about the millions that are sold in India each year, right? But again, the reports are that only those with deeper pockets can get those X440s in India, because most people are still going to go for the cheaper bikes, right? And let's not forget, at the time, it was almost like a bit of a race to the finish line. Who was going to get their bike out there first of all? Was it Triumph with their 400s, or was it Hero and Harley Davidson with their X440? Let's not forget, add another dynamic into this. Hero Motorcorp, who Harley Davidson brought out this X40 out, they also put their own version of it out, the Maverick, I believe it was, and I think they've just recently discontinued that. So Harley Davidson are fighting Triumph for market share of those kind of expensive, more cool bikes. They're fighting their own manufacturing partner, and they're still not selling great numbers of bikes at any great profit margin. And the reason I say this is because it's going to feed into another topic which I'm going to talk about in terms of Sportsters, right? So Trump coming out saying, yeah, we're going to put tariffs up on India is not going to help Harley Davidson at all. It's not going to help them at all. It won't save them in this regard. All they can do is just keep on trying to sell cheaper motorcycles. And this is where it comes into now, this new bike, this Sprint that Harley Davidson want to sell in the United States, or sell probably, I assume, all over the world, whenever it's launched. Well, what's it going to be based on? Where is it going to be manufactured? Who is manufacturing it? Where are the parts coming from? All these questions have yet to be addressed, have yet to be answered for sure. So does this fall into what Trump wants to do in terms of taking the country and making sure that motorcycles or manufacturing comes back to the United States? Well, if Harley Davidson do make this motorcycle in the United States, yes, it's worked. Obviously, Trump was right. It's worked. And companies like Harley Davidson are seeing sense. Yes, yeah, good. We'll make it over here. But my contention has always been with this $6,000 bike. It might be made in terms of assembled in America, but for that price point, it's going to have to be a lot. It's going to have to be really good. Also, I wouldn't be surprised that most of the parts actually come from outside of the United States. They probably come from India or China anyway. I wouldn't be surprised if this Sprint is actually just another version of either the X350, the X500, or the X440, you know, something like that. And it is going to be something like that, right? But I've always said, now this is something that Donald Trump might be able to help Harley Davidson in the United States in the sale of this $6,000 bike that they want to sell. In that, if they get those companies like Royal Enfield, who want to bring, and Triumph and things like that, who want to bring bikes into the United States, they will be seen as imports, so there'll be tariffs on those importers, right? So the unit price of those bikes in the United States will go up. They might come up to $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. Therefore, if they price match those, or Harley Davidson become a cheaper bike than those bikes, it'd be great. Otherwise, those bikes are still going to be cheaper or very competitively priced. And then you're going to wonder, what do people want to buy those bikes, which are really cool bikes and well-engineered bikes, and bikes that have got, they've got a really good reputation and a real good fan base out there, or you're going to support this new kid on the block, the Harley Davidson small bike that nobody really knows, right? Nobody really has any idea where it's coming from. It's an interesting time, I think, for Harley Davidson, because they've got to find their way in this world. They've got to find a new direction. Yeah, I was pleased that they're coming out with a new bike, but the proof is in the pudding, as we say. So they've got to see what they do with this bike, and when we finally realize what's actually happening, where it's coming from, how much it's going to cost, what the competitors are, it might be that Donald Trump has done them a favor in terms of these tariffs, or it might be he hasn't done them a favor at all. It might be something completely different. So if you think Donald Trump is on Harley Davidson's side, I would say think again, or just wait until you form your opinion, because we don't really know. Donald Trump is on Donald Trump's side, and Donald Trump is on what he believes that will bring success to the United States. And I don't necessarily criticize him for him. I don't praise him for that either, because obviously you've got to see if it works, right? And his supporters in the United States especially would say, well, yeah, it's a good thing. And if it works, right? Of course. If it works, you can't say it's a bad thing. But if it doesn't work, then, obviously you've got to say, well, obviously it didn't work, and it's a load of rubbish, right? But obviously the knock-on effect of these tariffs have been felt all around the world. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be good for the United States either. In this video, I said it's specifically about Harley Davidson. I don't think this tariff issue for Harley Davidson is going to help them at all in India, because the price point over there hasn't changed. It's only at 40%. It was never at 200% that Trump said. It was never at 200%. I think it was at one point it was 100%, but that was very short-lived. It was get down to 40%. And whether at 40%, 30%, or those big cruisers and tours are not going to be sold in any great numbers in India. They were never going to be sold that way. Because people are not going to buy it. They're nowhere near buying those sort of bikes over there, or in any numbers. Of course, there are some rich people in India. Of course, just because it's an overall poor country, it doesn't mean that, there aren't rich people. Of course there are. But the numbers, everyday people, no. So, and Harley Davidson are going to face this problem. It always comes down to price, trends, what people are buying, what people want to spend their money on. And they're not spending their money on big bikes like that. and certainly not in other countries where the average wage is a fraction what other people get in other countries. So it's yeah, I look at this from Harley Davidson and I think, wow, this is just it's not going to help Harley Davidson. It's not certainly not going to help them now. And when this $6,000 bike comes out, or any other bikes that they produce in that sort of smaller price bracket, it depends if they're going to be deemed as being American built or not. And for the sake of Harley Davidson, they need to make sure that these are American built, American manufactured, and everything like that, because otherwise they're going to fall foul of the tariffs. They're going to fall foul of the tariffs, and they won't be able to sell those bikes anywhere. Bear this in mind, guys. If you're assembling a bike in the United States and all the parts, or let's say half the parts that go on that bike, come from outside of the United States and manufactured elsewhere, there'll be import tariffs on those. So Harley Davidson have to pay the higher import tariffs on those products, right? Coming in. So the unit price of Harley Davidson on a new bike they might try and start off as being cheaper, but it'll soon ramp up, and then that $6,000 bike might soon become a $7,000, soon become an $8,000 bike within a couple of years. That's the thing. But listen, I wanted to talk about this because there's something else I want you to realize as well. It's kind of linked with this, and one of the reasons why Harley Davidson stopped selling the Sportster, and I've seen a video this week where this guy was saying he didn't know anything about why the Sportster was discontinued or the real reasons. And I read in the comments, and there's lots of people in the comments saying no other channel, Harley Davidson channel, has ever talked about this and everything like that. Well, I want to just show you something here. This is a web shot of my YouTube channel, and this video was made in 2022, I believe it was. Let me just have a look. Yeah, it's a live show which I talked about the Chinese Sportster, the V1200. What was happening there? This is did another one before that, but this is the one there. This is 2022. Let me just have a look here. Just go back on that. There we go. It was the 27th of June 2022 it streamed. So the reason why I'm showing you this is this. There are people out there who don't know why the Sportster was sold, and I talked about it 3 or 4 years ago and saying all the reasons were that they were saying that they couldn't meet Euro 5 emissions. But soon after, I found out that Harley Davidson had sold the rights and sold the tooling for the Sportsters to the Chinese. The Chinese, Shinrei motorcycle and SWN, I believe it was, all still produced in China. It's not produced in Italy or anywhere else, okay? Because these are some might be assembled in Italy, but they're all Chinese, okay? What a lot of people fail to realize, there are European motorcycle brands that are actually Chinese brands. They were just bought out, and all the production went over to China and then shipped back over. So Shinrei bought everything from Harley Davidson. They were sold it. And one of the reasons we were told that Sportsters weren't able to be sold anymore in Europe, or certainly not going to be sold because they couldn't meet Euro 5 emissions controls. Well, the Chinese just took that bike, just changed a couple of things, and they sold it again. So it's exactly the same bike. It's exactly the same bike, exactly the same engine. No real difference here. They got video footage of it starting up. It's all in that live show there. You can go and watch it. This is over 3 years ago, which I talked about this. I talked about the whole reason why Sportsters were sold. Now, the whole point, all of that was really a lie in terms of the real reason why it wasn't sold. The reason it wasn't sold anymore, or they stopped selling it in the United States and stuff like that, because people are asking, well, that's all European emissions. What about American emissions? It's got nothing to do with us. The reason is that they weren't earning enough money, profit, on each Sportster. They were only earning small percentage of it. So this ties into what I've talked about before a few months ago, where Harley Davidson executive talked about new smaller engine and cheaper bikes from Harley Davidson. They probably need to come out with that. This was just before, about a couple of months before the news came out, the new $6,000 bike was coming out. You see how it all starts to link in here. But he was saying at the time, the reason why the Sportsters were not going to be made for Harley Davidson anymore, or weren't being made, because the unit price wasn't, or the unit profit wasn't enough. But he acknowledged that even though there's no profit in it, what they've lost was a great deal more, and that was entry level bike, and people getting into the brand, and people getting into Sportsters and things like that. So that's why they needed something to get people back into the brand at that entry level, at that starter level. And this is why the $6,000 bike has come out. But the reason why the Sportsters were sold, the reason why the Sportsters were not sold anymore was basically because they weren't earning enough profits on this new hardwire. Okay, because it's all about the strategy of Harley Davidson just selling big expensive bikes for the biggest profits that they can, and they don't really want to sell bikes that help the brand, help the riding community, that get new people into it. It's a very short and narrow-minded view of the future of Harley Davidson. They're just looking at getting the maximum that they can right now. And you say, well, okay, it's profits, right? It's profits, that's what we want. And we love the tourists, and we love the baggers, and we love all that sort of stuff. Great, yeah, I do too. But at the same time, I've always said this, Harley Davidson needed something else. They need to diversify into different types of motorcycles and cheaper motorcycles. And it seems as if they're coming back to it. But the one big casualty of that was the Sportster. The Sportster has all been sold off. They sold off the rights to it. I talked about this 3 years ago, right? So when people are talking about, so we've never heard this before, I'm saying, well, I'm sorry, you have to come to my channel then. You have to find my channel to see, well, no, I've already talked about this 3 years ago. I've already talked about the new engine, the way they were testing it, the way they were meeting emissions controls, the way that they were going to be bringing it out into Europe and maybe in other parts of the world. And hey, would this be a success if they brought it to the United States? Would you buy it? I talked about all of this in quite a few videos, not just that live show, but a few videos at the time. This is over 3 years ago. So people saying no, but the channel's talking about it. Well, yeah, they did, but just that you haven't seen it. Or you're only seeing one type of Harley Davidson channel, or one type of motorcycle channel that only gives you a snippet, or only, talks about stuff like that, and I've always tried to bring you a well-rounded view of what goes on in the motorcycle world, but also in the Harley Davidson world. So these two issues are inextricably linked with each other. They are directly linked with each other. Trump tariffs and making manufacturing go to the United States and doing cheap bikes or cheaper bikes to get new people into the brand. And then the history of Harley Davidson going to other countries and trying to produce their bikes for cheaper unit price and get around tariffs and get around import duties and things like that. And where they've had successes, where they've had failures. And then all the way coming back to why did they sell off the Sportster? Because they just didn't see it as a money-making motorcycle, so they wanted to get rid of it. And it doesn't matter who was into those bikes and what new people were coming into the brand all the time with those bikes around the world. They just saw it as, and we all know, if you're a motorcycle person, you would acknowledge that the Sportsters are probably the best bikes that Harley Davidson ever made, right? In terms of just overall appeal, or getting people into it, or people, you would see people on, if you want to have your motorcycle riding around the streets, the Sportster is the one, right? because it gives you the name and it gives you, a bit of the sound. It hasn't got the performance, we know that, but some of those bikes really had the look. They were great bikes. I've always said, you look at my videos from years ago, I talked about Sportsters. I think the best proportioned bikes that Harley Davidson ever made, right? I've said that repeatedly. So you sacrifice that just because they're not making enough profit. They weren't making a loss. This has got to be clear now. They weren't making a loss. They just weren't making enough profit that bring all the bikes in line with this hardwire project under the last CEO, Jochen Zeitz. So they've had to backpedal on this. So if you talk about an ownership that really doesn't know what they're doing, or haven't got the best interests of the people who want to ride their bikes, well, there you go. There you have it. You've sold off your biggest asset in terms of what gets people through the door, what gets people into Harley Davidsons. And if you stick with Harley Davidsons, guess what? There's going to be a fair percentage that will stick with the Sportster, but there's also going to be a fair percentage who will step up to a cruiser, will step up to a bagger after that. They failed to realise that. Failed to realise what was staring them in the face the whole time. And you could only say that, well, hey, reap what you sow. Reap what you sow. And now they're having to come out with a cheaper bike here, with a $6,000 bike. And you think, well, that's not going to make any money for you. Depending on where it's made, it's not going to make any unit profit. So how long will that last? How much of a success will it be? People talk to me all the time, or people in the comments say they need to bring back the Sportster. I'm not sure if they can bring back the Sportster. Now, it depends what kind of deal, what was in the contract to sell the rights to China. I don't know what the actual deal was. I don't know if it was just the rights or temporary rights. I don't know if it was for a 5-year deal. I mean, I'm not privy to that information. But the only way they can bring the Sportster back is if they didn't sell everything off. But if they've sold all the tooling as well, then they have to bring all the tooling back. Or they have to make their own tooling again. So the massive investment in that bike, range of bikes, they would have to do again when they already had it. They didn't need to do anything. All they needed to do is change a couple of things to make it Euro 5 compliant if you want to sell those bikes in Europe, or just don't do anything about Europe and just keep on selling the United States. Or in other parts of the world, they don't worry about the Euro 5 emissions compliance. That's all they need to do, but they shot themselves in the foot. So now they've got this new bikes, or new proposed new bikes coming in. Well, if they're sold in the United States, they're not going to be making any profits on those. So the only way you're going to be making any kind of profits on those is to be made in India or made in China, right? That would be something similar like the bikes are already selling over there. Not in great numbers, I'll have you know. But I might add, but at the same time, they're still selling the bikes. But now bring in Trump, and then you think, well, if those bikes are going to be made over there, they're going to have to import them over here. Therefore, that's an import. Therefore, they're going to have the import tariff on those as well. Guess what? Those bikes are definitely not going to be cheaper anymore. So those bikes that they could sell in the United States, let's say, they could be a $3,500–4,000 bike if the tariffs weren't an issue, and also if they were made elsewhere. But either they're made elsewhere and the tariffs are going to come out onto it. That's going to bring it up to a $6,000 bike. So it's still a foreign bike, let's say. And it depends, what the build quality is on the bike, so we just don't know. Or they're made in the United States. They're in the United States, and because of the cost of the United States, that makes it a $6,000 bike. When really, it should be a $3,500, but it might even be a cheaper one. BSA have just launched a Bantam, 350 Bantam, resurrected the old name from that. That's going to come out about £3,500–4,000, which would be in the region of about $4,500. That's a British price, but a European price. But if that went to the United States without tariffs, of course, tariffs, right? That would be a $3,000 bike, $3,500 bike. So again, tariffs play a big part here. Import duties, they all play a big part here. But what's happened with Harley Davidson in terms of these entry-level bikes they've shot themselves in the foot, and now they're trying to regain ground a little bit with these new bikes, new proposed bikes for 2026. And we're going to hopefully going to find out very soon what they are. But we don't know really whether tariffs are going to play their part or not the part. You know, have this already been factored in, this $6,000 bike? Is this all load of duff information as well? But the reason why the Sportsters were sold was because they weren't making enough money on it, in line with the Hardwire project. They sold all the rights, all the commercial rights, all the tooling to Chinese manufacturer who started producing a Chinese Sportster, effectively, SWM 1200, and the V1200. That's been sold, and they've been selling it in China. I think they've been selling in other parts of the world. I think they definitely tried to start selling in Europe. I haven't seen many at all. In fact, I haven't seen any. At shows I've seen them, but not anywhere else. They had it at EICMA a couple of years ago, I believe, but that was about it. And they were going to try and put them out all around Europe. But yeah, it's an interesting time. Actually, let me have a look here. Let me have a quick look to see if the Shinra V1200. So look, Shinra massive. Yeah, so it is where it's being sold. Okay, it's called the Stormbreaker, SWM Stormbreaker. Let's have a look here. There we go. Right. Yeah, so this is under the Italian brand SWM, which it is. This is still going to be range. Yes, discover the bike. Find a dealer. Right. Okay, let me just quickly show you my website here. This is it, SWM. This is a European, so this is Italy for 1971, but this is a Chinese brand, right? This is a Chinese brand. Don't ignore all the Italy, it's all Chinese brand. This is what a lot of people don't understand. That's why you come to this channel, right? So I'll explain it to you and give you all the details. Right, find a dealer. This is where, okay, so there is one in the United States, Central Power Sports Distribution, LLC. That's in Watertown. That's in, what's that, Maryland, is it? Yeah. Where's that? Yeah, okay, let's try and come out here. Okay, there's no dealers over here, so I don't know where. Let's have it. Okay, let's just go Italy. Okay. Oh. Yeah, so they can be sold all over Europe here. Let's have it. Okay. Right, so there's quite a few here all around Europe and Europe as well, and in UK. Not many in France, not many in England, but certainly in Germany. Yeah, all these locations that you could get one or order it online. And if I didn't, let's just go USA. Yeah, so only one in the United States. That is Watertown. I don't even know where that is. Central Power Sports, Watertown. Is that South Dakota? It's right on the border there, South Dakota, just north of Sioux Falls. That's where that is. So you've only got one. Only got one distributor in the United States. But hey, listen, that's if you're looking at it, that's what it is. So let's get back to that. So look, I mean, I hadn't really researched making this video where it's being sold, but look. I haven't seen many of these bikes on the road. In fact, I haven't seen them at all. But they are a Chinese bike, really. You know, not saying that's a bad thing, but it's a Sportster at the end of the day. The Sportster was sold, or the rights to making that Sportster was sold off, and Harley Davidson had to backtrack again just to try and get cheap bikes, entry-level bikes into the bike. I mean, if that is ever an indictment on basically the shit show that the ownership of shit job that the ownership have done over the last few years with Harley Davidson, then that's it. that tells you everything, that really they've completely mismanaged what Harley Davidson is, because everybody talks about the cruisers and the baggers and the road glide and the street glide and the, the M8 engine, how great it is. But, that's what you're all, YouTube channels, and they're all out there. They all talk about the new bikes, right? Yeah, great. Right. And there are some that will try and buy them, right? And they'll, look at this great bike, look at this great bike. But they don't talk for you and I and lots of other people, right? They don't talk for you. They just show you what these bikes are. And it's great because they're popularizing new bikes that are coming out of the brand, right? But I've always tried to, on my channel, and all the work that I've put out over the years, all the videos that I've put out and the podcasts and things like that, I've always tried to give a balanced view and give you both sides of the story. And look at it from, I'm just want to buy a motorcycle. Does this appeal to me? Can I afford it? What's the practicality of it? All that kind of stuff. Working on bikes, fixing bikes. Can I fix it? Do I have the tools? Do I have the experience? Do I have the knowledge to do it? Looking at a bike, does it quite work? What's the problem there? Why didn't they do this? Couldn't they have made this a different way? So I've always looked at it from, I want to buy a bike, not I want to sell a bike. I've never been about, I know some channels do this. Say, hey, look, it's a great bike. You can buy this bike. It's fantastic. It'll cost you $30,000, but hey, it's fantastic. It's brilliant. All that. I've never been that person. Even when I've test rode bikes and did road reviews or bike reviews, I always looked at it from my point of view about buying a bike. Would I buy it? So this is what I would say to, those channels. I'd say, well, or to those channels, but also especially to Harley Davidson, say, you've never looked at this from a buying point of view, the Harley Davidson rider's buying point of view. You've looked at it from selling. You want to sell the biggest, and you're not seeing it from what kind of value does a new person buying our product, what do they get? What do they want? What would they really like? That kind of thing. And for me, you've got to have that in sales. You've got to have that as a company, because you've got to know what your customers want. You've got to know what would they like. We've got to listen to them. And years they haven't listened. They haven't listened to what Harley Davidson people want. But also you've got to understand that just because you've got a problem with your fan base, let's say, your customer base, who are getting older and older and older. Well, as you get older, you do tend to, one, get more conservative in your views. You do tend to, everybody does, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on. You do tend to get a bit more conservative, but also you do tend to stabilize into different modes of transport or different types, right? You move away from the young kids sports bikes and you go into something a bit more laid back because everything hurts a little bit more, that kind of thing, right? So you've got an aging demographic of people who just got into these big bikes, and you forgot about the new generation coming through who are not there yet, and you're going to be waiting for them just to fill in this top section, this high section of the older person section, who's more financially secure section. And for a few years, you put all your eggs in one basket of this big section, this big group that has got loads of cash, that was cash rich, and they could buy monies. And even if they couldn't afford it, they could buy it on finances, and things would work out great, and everybody could afford it, and everybody was riding around on brand new motorcycles, big cruisers, big baggers, and you had all these channels who were giving you free support and free advertising because they want to be part and jump on the gravy train too, and they're all saying, yeah, look at this great, and everything was great for a while, until the unavoidable came along, which I've been warning about for many, many years. They say at some point the finances won't match, and people would just start to regress and start thinking, we can't afford this, we can't afford to pay this. And because they'd focus on this high profit bike, and they didn't listen to what lots of people were saying, or they listened to the wrong people only, or in different CEOs were taking the company in different directions and never listening to everybody. They were just listening to one section and trying to ignore another section. And you get into a mess. You get yourselves into a mess. So this has been total mismanagement from Harley Davidson for many, many years. This new CEO who's come in, who's taken her from Jochen Zeitz, God knows which way he's going to take the company. I mean, it could be that, you don't have a Harley Davidson in a few years' time. It could be just subdivisions of something. Things could be sold off. Who knows? Who knows at this stage? But, it's an interesting time if you're a Harley Davidson fan. But I think it's something that under Matt Levatich, the previous CEO, before Jochen Zeitz, the traditional Harley Davidson rider wasn't being listened to because he had the Many Roads program or the New Roads program. They just wanted to get Harley Davidson out to as many countries in the world and everything like that. And, talk about these, the new bikes and stuff like that, right? And, the Revolution Max bikes and the electric bikes that were coming. Then Jochen Zeitz came in and said, no, we need to focus on, the bikes that make us a load of money. But either way, you're just focusing either on big bikes, big sellers, and you're ignoring the ones people who can't afford it, or you're ignoring the people who don't want those bikes, or that you're ignoring the new, younger people who wanted to come into motorcycling in general, and that you're not attracting them to Harley Davidson, because it's all seen as really rich woman's motorcycle for an older generation. So either way, as a company, you're failing to get your new clientele and your new people through the door. If you're selling off a Sportster license, you're selling off the tooling, you've got nobody coming in through the door who wants to come for a Sportster, but is also going to be looking at those other bikes and thinking, well, I'm going to get a Sportster now, but one day I'll get that bike. So you could either come in with an 883 or a 1200. You think, wow, that's a really cool bike. And I've known so many people over the years who've gone to Sportsters, think, oh yeah, I'll have that. A few years later, a year later, they trade that in, they get a cruiser or whatever they get, right? They get it. Or they definitely, they got the big bike and, they got a girlfriend or a wife who's, wants to get into motorcycling as well. You've got a Harley and say, well, actually, if you've got a Sportster, it's perfect for you, perfect size, perfect balance, and it's a great bike as well. Now you're both on Harley Davidsons. Now you can both join the whole group, and now you can, you can do all sorts of stuff because you brought new people into it. They sold all that off. There's no new people coming into it. So you screwed yourself You haven't listened to people. You haven't produced bikes that people want or people can afford, I should say. There's double-edged sword there. And you haven't produced bikes that bring new people into the fold. Well, there we go. That says it all, doesn't it? That says it all. So, so now you're backtracking with a new bike. Your hope is a new bike. That's going to bring in new people. But the damage might already be done. Regardless of what tariffs are going to assist you by Trump. And remember, Trump's only going to be there for another couple of years, 2-3 years, whatever it is. He's only going to be there for a couple of years, then you're going to get somebody else in, right? So, unless there's a constitutional change where he stays there, for the rest of time, I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting time for Harley Davidson. It'll be interesting to see which bikes they bring out for 2026, price point, where they're going to be sold, all sorts of things. But they haven't done themselves any favours. They screwed themselves over. The Revolution Max bikes, myself, I've said this so many times. Putting aside the Pan America, right, which has a Revolution Max engine, of course. But the other bikes have just been a total disaster. They've just been people might like them, but I'm talking about in numbers sold. They haven't been great sellers. And this year they've been the production being shifted over to Thailand anyway. So even those bikes being sold in the United States will be subject to tariffs anyway, coming in from Thailand. So it'll be even more bikes. Even though this year Harley Davidson reduced the price, guess what? That's going to be They're not making any profit on that. I wouldn't be surprised if they're making a bit of a loss on those bikes. So there we go. That says it all again, doesn't it? You know, bad decision making time and time again for Harley Davidson. And I'm no surprise that the CEO coming in, and I wouldn't be surprised though looking at this as a business, as a profitable business, and saying we need to turn this around quickly. We need to do something quickly. We need to sell off bits here. We need to do bits here. I would not be surprised if they're going through the numbers, they're looking at this and saying, we need to bring this bike in. But this is a bike that apparently they've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years. Well, it must be a fucking great bike if they've been working on it 3 or 4 years. Because, you know, it won't take the Chinese or the Indians that long to make a bike, or any other manufacturer that long. So, you know, we're talking basics here of a bike. But because they've been so out of the fold with all this, you just wonder within Harley Davidson themselves, the structure, do they have the knowledge, the know-how of bringing in these new bikes, cheaper bikes, more simple bikes? I'm not so sure. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I'm not so sure. It's an interesting time. It's an interesting time for Harley Davidson. It's an interesting time for them to win you back. That's the thing, win you back. And I'm not so sure that they can win you back. I'm not so sure that this new CEO, his intentions are there to win you back. I think the intentions are there to see where the company is, to make big decisions over the next year, couple of years. And you would hope that they build on from their position now and start bringing out a variety of bikes that speak to many different people, and they listen to many different, you know, bikers out there and the marketplace. And you can see that they are a company that is going to produce lots of bikes throughout the whole price range, and they're going to work for you. Or they don't, and they think this is just not worth it. We're going to sell off bits and parts. I wouldn't be surprised if they sold off. Well, you know, Livewire is a different company, but obviously it's still Harley Davidson. You know, Harley Davidson stopped the support for that. I wouldn't be surprised if that goes. I wouldn't be surprised if lots of models go in the cruiser lineup, and also in the touring lineup as well. You know, they do something that shrinks it all down a little. I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking at making cost savings all over the place. I wouldn't be surprised. But anyway, you know, that's just a guess right now. But in terms of the tariffs, you know, are they saving Harley Davidson? I don't think it's going to make any difference in India or any other foreign markets. So that, you know, in terms of, because people aren't going to buy those bikes if they're really expensive anyway. If the tariffs are increased, that's just going to make them even more. That's going to cut down, you know, your customer base anyway. Guess what? In the UK, I've already talked about it. There's been about 10 or 12 dealerships over the last year and a half that have sold. Indian are now taken over in terms of the number of dealerships available in the UK for people to buy American bikes. You know, so it's Indian or Harley Davidson. Indian are taken over in terms of the new dealerships that are most available, that people are going to go to buy that. So, you know, they're shrinking. Harley Davidson is shrinking. Dealerships have been, you know, shrinking all over the world. They've been disappearing. Their strategy just hasn't been conducive to making good business. And I've always said, you know, that yes, the dealerships get a lot of criticism for the way they've acted, but also the support they get from the big company, the motor company, has not been great at all. So it hasn't been a great relationship for many years. So that says its own story, or tells its own story, really. That if the dealerships are struggling, it's because also they're having to deal with the issues and their relationship with the motor company, and that motor company is not serving them right on many different levels, whether it's financing, whether it's forcing stock on them, whether it's their warranty issues, all that sort of stuff. It hasn't been a great relationship there, and that's why lots of dealerships have been struggling, you know, and whether they'd admit that or not. I mean, one of the biggest things that happened a couple of years ago was where many dealerships were being forced to redesign their dealerships and have the branding, and this was all forced upon them on Harley Davidson. This was more than a couple of years ago now.
But also what happened was that all that expense was going to be on the dealership. They had to spend it. It wasn't the company saying, no, this is all new stuff, go and put it freely on your dealership. No, the dealerships had to do it all themselves, and they had to spend just to retain their license to operate as a main dealer. And many were saying, do you know what, we can't do this anymore. We just can't do that. It's way too much money. We can't do it. You know. And many were thinking, should we carry on, just do something else? You know. But obviously some do. Let us know your thoughts. Let's say this has been RevelatorAlf podcast for another week. And well, that SWM, I'm looking at it right now. It's not a bad little bike if you like Sportsters. I'll have to see if I can find one and go and have a ride on one. But yeah, I mean, they are Chinese. They are Chinese-made Sportsters. Essentially, that's what they are. Right. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Going to catch you again on another podcast video coming very soon. Bye now.